Welcome to the DVR 101 presentation. This presentation is regarding the Colorado Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. I am Carolina Johnson-Stark, a DVR Counselor 2 in the Centennial and Aurora office, and I am the IDD Supported Employment Lead for our region. All right, let's get started. What are we going to talk about in this presentation? We're going to go over what DVR is, the processes, how to refer to DVR, what services are provided, how DVR works with the CCB funding through Medicaid waivers, some myths and facts about DVR, and any questions. So what exactly is DVR and what do we do? Colorado DVR is a state agency. We believe that anyone with a disability who wants to work can work regardless of the type or severity of their disability. We provide a wide variety of individualized services for people with disabilities to allow them to reach their employment goals and live as independently as possible. DVR assists individuals with disabilities to prepare for employment, obtain employment, perform job tasks, maintain employment, and advance in employment. Some of the services that we can provide to get ready for a job include one-on-one vocational counseling and guidance, pre-ET services, also known as pre-employment transition services to our students with disabilities, physical and mental restoration services, training, vocational, academic, and personal adjustment. Some of the employment services that we can provide include job seeking skills training, job placement, coaching, on-the-job training, rehab technology services, benefits counseling for those individuals who are receiving SSI, SSDI, supportive services such as maintenance, assistance with transportation, and personal assistance services. So let's talk a little bit more about what our process is. So once an individual has decided that they want to work with DVR, the first step is the application. All individuals must apply for services and meet our eligibility criteria in order to receive support. The first step after meeting with an individual for the initial engagement intake would be eligibility. The individual must have a permanent disability that results in a barrier to getting or keeping suitable employment. The individual must be actively participating in services, and they must be necessary for them to obtain or maintain employment. And so what does that mean? So in order to be eligible for DVR, an individual must have a permanent disability. So a broken arm is not going to qualify for DVR. However, we understand that things like intellectual, developmental disabilities, cognitive impairments, physical disabilities, and other impairments such as hearing loss and things like that can absolutely impact employment. And those are things we're looking for with documentation of that disability. Once determined eligible, the individual will meet with their designated DVR counselor. And that's when the fun will start thinking about working together to decide on an appropriate employment goal and developing the IPE or individualized plan for employment. That's when a lot of this is around informed choice. So we will work with the individual and their DVR counselor work together to talk about what services are needed, what job goal is a good fit for that individual, what things might be needed that we're not sure of. Do we need continued evaluation? Do we need help with assistive technology? Do we really need to look more into that career exploration? Once the services are determined, we'll also use informed choice to find the vendor. So we want to find who is going to work with that person and that individual receiving services in order to get the most support that they need. Once that's all determined, it will be individually tailored to meet their unique rehab needs and written into the plan. When the plan is signed by all individuals, the DVR counselor will then monitor the services that are happening in the IPE, ensuring that they're progressing towards the employment goal, and really just monitoring to make sure that the vendors that everyone agreed upon are doing their part, meeting with the individual themselves. So that might be helping with things like working on a resume, working on interviewing skills, working on practicing some of those things to get ready for a job. Once the person is secured employment and is stable on the job, DVR would then eventually close their case successfully. The timeline is a great question that we get a lot at DVR is, how long is this process going to take? What does the timeline look like? When am I going to get a job, etc.? This can really depend on the services that are needed. The rehab process can last anywhere from a few months to several years, especially if we're looking at things like more long-term training for individuals. So how can DVR help me? One main thing that we do here at DVR is job exploration, search, and coaching. That includes vocational counseling and guidance, career exploration, job shadowing, preparing for interviews, working on a resume, filling out job applications, working on job coaching, personal adjustment, helping with work experience. So some of the individuals that come to DVR have never worked before, have limited work experience, or maybe even looking at a new career that they have not done before. Even if they have work experience, they don't have work experience in the field that they're interested in. So that can include things like helping with paid internships, paid work experiences, community-based work experiences, and finding competitive integrated jobs within the community. DVR could potentially also assist with training. This includes inclusive ed, transportation training, industry-specific certifications, work adjustment training are all examples of trainings that we could support to help individuals entering into employment. Independence. Some of these services include connecting an individual with a benefits counselor to learn more about different programs, how to report earnings, and other ways that their employment can integrate with the benefits that they're receiving. We can also refer and connect individuals to other agencies outside of DVR to help them become as independent as possible, such as an independent living center, an advocate, or other programs like that. Every DVR service is agreed upon and curated specifically for the individual that we're serving and may look completely different depending on their needs, interests, skills, abilities, capabilities, limitations, and their employment goal. So I know what you're thinking, wow, DVR is amazing. Everything is free. Not exactly. If an individual who receives DVR services is also receiving SSI, Social Security income, or SSDI, Social Security Disability Insurance benefits, because of their disability, there is no cost for any of the approved DVR services. Some of our services are always available to no cost to the individual that is being served, and those would be discussed with the DVR counselor before being agreed upon on the IPE. Other services may be paid for in full by DVR or may require a financial participation from the individual. And so that looks at things like perhaps somebody is working and they need help with hearing aids. We know that hearing aids can be very expensive. It may come down to the individual pays a portion of a new pair of hearing aids and DVR pays for another portion. All services are agreed upon and approved beforehand and will be determined as necessary, appropriate, and least possible cost. So unfortunately, we can't be out here, buying people Mercedes and things like that, right? We're using our taxpayer dollars, so we still need to think at, is this necessary to obtain the job goal? Is it appropriate? And is this at the least possible cost? So say somebody needs a laptop in order to participate in their training program. Unfortunately, unless it's necessary for that program, we can't purchase a $6,000 laptop. We're looking more, in the $200–300 range, right? We also have some negotiated rates, such as the hearing aid contract. So like I mentioned before, if somebody's working and happens to need hearing aids, we might be able to assist with that. What we would do is we have a contracted rate for those hearing aids that's much cheaper than buying them out of pocket. And that would be discussed with the hearing aid provider, the individual and services, and the DVR counselor. Some services may require additional funding, such as inclusive ed. So DVR does have a cap of how much we can spend for certain program costs and things like that in inclusive ed programs. And again, we don't want to get too far ahead. That can all be discussed with the DVR counselor once that is determined to be a necessary service. So at this point, I know you're thinking, I'm ready to sign up with DVR. I'm ready to get a job. This sounds great. What do I need to do first? Okay. We want to make sure that everyone is involved in this process. So I understand that parents, guardians, host home providers, lots of people are in some of our individuals' lives, and they are an amazing source of support. However, we want to make sure that the individual who will be participating in services is the one driving these services, and the individual has involvement, is aware of DVR, wants to participate, and wants employment. And there's generally 3 different ways that you can refer to DVR. The first one is through our DVR interest form online. So if you go to dvr.colorado.gov, you can search for an online interest form, fill out a few questions, and you will be directly assigned to a DVR office that's within your zip code and catchment area. And then a DVR counselor would reach out to you once assigned. You can also contact your local DVR office by phone and do a self-referral over the phone that way. Through that same dvr.colorado.gov website, you can search what office is closest to where you live. And finally, another way would be to contact your CCB case manager and let them know that you are interested in working with DVR and finding employment, and they will help fill out the DVR application and paperwork with you, and some releases of information, and then they will send that directly to the DVR office where you'll get assigned a counselor. All right, so speaking of CCB, we do have a braided funding model. And so what does that mean? So there are some times in which DVR cannot allow certain services or be authorized certain services, and there are limitations to what we can pay for. Same thing, there are limitations to what the Medicaid waiver can pay for through the CCB. DVR and Medicaid funding do not always need to be one or the other, but there are times when both payers are appropriate to use separate services at the same time with an individual who's seeking an employment. A good example of that would be, let's say an individual is working, they're receiving job coaching through their Medicaid waiver, but they're thinking about finding a new job. They can absolutely apply to DVR, and we can start the process of finding a new job while the Medicaid waiver continues to fund the ongoing job coaching for the original job. DVR is a time-limited agency, so some services such as job coaching may be initially funded through us at DVR, but will eventually be funded through a CCB service plan long-term. Other things to be aware of at DVR is if an individual requires line of sight supervision, that will need to be paid for through a Medicaid waiver. It is not a service that DVR can pay for. However, that being said, that's a perfect example of braided funding where DVR can help support the employment services such as job searching, job coaching once employed, perhaps help with transportation, while the waiver would cover any supervision during that time. So let's talk a little bit about some DVR myths and facts. The first one says DVR is able to support non-competitive employment, such as group employment, volunteer opportunities, or jobs set aside for people with disabilities. This is actually false. DVR as a state agency can only support competitive integrated employment, meaning jobs that are paid at competitive wages, so not volunteer or sub-minimum wage. Integrated, meaning people with and without disabilities working together, jobs that are not set aside specifically for people with disabilities. Employment in the community, okay? The second one says DVR has a menu of services that individuals can choose from. This is kind of false, right? So rather than thinking of it as a menu where individuals pick and choose, they want this service, this service, this service, DVR more so works with the individual to think about the best job goal, and then we work our way backwards to determine what services are necessary, appropriate, and obviously at least possible cost in order to achieve that job goal. So let's say we're helping with somebody with school. Maybe they need an associate's degree in order to get a specific job goal. DVR would not be able to support that person taking a yoga class and a dolphin training class if their job goal is automotive, right? So we want to think about what services can DVR provide that are necessary in order to achieve agreed upon job goal. The third one says DVR will pay for education, training, and certificates to those individuals who are eligible for our program. This one, again, I'm going to say is half true, right? While we can absolutely pay for education, training, and certification, it's not for just anybody who's eligible for DVR, but needs to make sense and for the agreed upon job goal. And that training also needs to be a training that is going to provide an industry specific and industry recognized certification, degree, something of that sort. DVR can only fund job coaching for 90 days after someone becomes employed. This is false. DVR can support job coaching for individuals who are in supported employment for up to 24 months if necessary. Obviously, if somebody's working and they are able to become independent on the job very quickly, or they only need a few hours of job coaching a month, we would absolutely at that point have a discussion about transferring that job coaching over to their waiver. But we understand that employment can be tricky. There are things that we need to learn along the way, and that individuals we are serving are going to need support and time to be able to be as independent as possible in these positions. And so we are around for basically as long as we need to, but up to 24 months. And finally, the last one says that DVR cannot serve individuals who require line of sight supervision. And as we said previously, this is false. We can absolutely serve those individuals. We just need to make sure that we are working in tandem with the CCB so that that service of the supervision, that service person is being funded through the CCB Medicaid waiver and is on their service plan, and it cannot be funded through DVR. However, we can continue to provide all the other supports at the same time. So let's talk a little bit about specialty populations and referrals. So DVR counselors are all trained to work with a variety of disabilities. And typically referrals are divided evenly among counselors' offices by zip code. However, some counselors have specialty caseloads that allow them to serve as a subject matter expert and best serve individuals in certain areas. So our Denver Metro office has a blind, visually impaired, and deafblind unit. So if somebody identifies with one of those disabilities, they may be best served out of that office. Similarly, if someone is deaf of heart and hearing and communicates using American Sign Language or ASL, we do have counselors in the Denver Metro office who sign and who identify as being deaf of heart and hearing themselves. So we know that that makes things like communication a lot easier rather than needing to go to another office and using an interpreter. The CCB that works with Denver Metro is going to be Rocky Mountain Human Services. They also work with the IPS programs at Aurora Mental Health Center and Mental Health Center of Denver. The Centennial and Aurora offices, the CCB that they work with is going to be Developmental Pathways, and the Mental Health Center is going to be All Health Network. In Golden, we have DDRC as the CCB that they work with, and their Mental Health Center is Jeffco. And obviously an individual can request to work with a specific office. However, we really want to avoid allowing, transferring from counselor to counselor in order to keep it as smooth as possible. So if we know that someone's connected with developmental pathways from the beginning, we would want them at the very beginning to be assigned a counselor who works in the Centennial or Aurora office. Same with if we know somebody's primary disability is that they're deaf and they communicate with ASL, we want that very first appointment to be through our Denver Metro office. So that will be helpful when calling and making that referral or getting connected to DVR to let them know that if you are connected with a CCB, a mental health center, or blind, visually impaired, deaf-blind, deaf, and hard of hearing. Okay, that is DVR in a nutshell. You can always reach out to your local office to get connected with the DVR counselor, even if it's just to ask some questions. We're always available. The front desk or administrative assistants can absolutely answer questions as well. But if you ever want to speak to a counselor, if you have questions about DVR before applying, typically a counselor has no problem answering some of those questions, and we're always available. Thank you.